The Keeper of the Haze. Arthur lived in a world of oatmeal beige. It was more than a color. It was a frequency. It was the muted tone of his cubicle walls, the flat taste of his morning coffee, and the exact pitch of the voice in his head that sounded like his father. Father was a man of iron-roofed certainties, a man who had spent decades cross-referencing Arthur's hesitations as if they were terminal flaws. Because of his dad, Arthur walked with his shoulders rolled forward, an undiscarded ghost haunting his own life, always waiting for the floorboards to judge him. The day the pressure finally cracked him was the day of the promotion announcement. The sought-after senior position was open, and the office was buzzing with a frantic, sharp energy that made Arthur feel like glass in a stone crusher. The walls of his cubicle began to lean in, the fluorescent lights humming a mocking electrical tune. He retreated. He didn't go to the break room or the lobby. He headed for the only place that felt as heavy as his heart, the basement of his apartment building. The descent was slow. Each step down the concrete stairs felt like a surrender. The air downstairs was thick with the scent of wet concrete and stagnant time, the smell of things forgotten and left to rot. As the panic rose, a cold, slick hand tightening on his throat, Arthur lunged for the small, grime-streaked window set high in the foundation at street level. He fumbled with the rusted latch, his fingers trembling with a thistle thrum of pure anxiety, until it finally groaned open. He pressed his face to the gap, gasping for the soot-heavy air of the city, watching the feet of strangers pass by at eye level. That was when the Gover arrived. The Gover didn't scuttle like a scavenger. It moved with a fluid, copper-glint grace, slipping through the narrow window and landing silently on a stack of his dad's old, leather-bound ledgers. The Gover didn't flee when he saw Arthur. Instead, he sat back on his haunches, the pattern on its head glowing a neon-bright pattern against the shadows. He looked at Arthur with eyes like polished onyx, and then he exhaled. It wasn't the spray of a cornered animal. It was a shimmering, heavy haze, a glimmer silt of pheromones that rolled across the concrete floor like a slow-motion wave. As Arthur breathed it in, a magnesium flare ignited at the base of his skull. The oatmeal beige of his mind was scorched away by a raw, animalistic certainty. For the first time in 30 years, his dad's voice was drowned out by a deep, resonant roar of presence. Arthur stood up. His spine didn't just straighten, it locked into place with the strength of an iron beam. The next morning, the office felt like a stage, and Arthur was the only one with the script. He didn't walk through the rows of desks. He radiated through them. He passed Angela's desk, the vibrant center of his world whom he'd only ever dared to look at through the reflection of his computer screen. He stopped. The air around him seemed to thicken, charged with the lingering residue of Gover's haze. "Angela," he said. His voice was no longer flat. It held the weight of mahogany and the grit of the basement. "I have something to ask you, but it can wait 10 minutes. Don't go anywhere." He didn't wait for her to stammer a reply. He marched toward the glass-walled office at the end of the hall and stepped inside without knocking. His manager looked up, the usual criticism already forming on his lips, but the words died in the air. Arthur didn't sit on the edge of the guest chair. He sank deep into the leather, claiming the space his dad always said he didn't deserve. He spoke with a thistle thrum of authority, laying out his value with the precision of a surgeon. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Arthur had ever heard. It was the sound of a man being recognized. When he walked out, the sought-after title was practically already on his door. He went back to Angela and told her, didn't ask her, that they were going out at 8. He promised old wine and tablecloths, but as the afternoon wore on, the high of the pheromones began to ferment. He felt untouchable, a copper-glint god in a world of cardboard. The reckless itch under his skin drove him away from his desk and into the neon-bright glare of a local casino. He stood at a high-stakes table, his eyes wide and dilated, convinced that the laws of probability were just suggestions. He bet everything: the old wine money, his savings, his safety. With the snap of a card against green felt, the fever broke. The dealer raked in the chips. The neon-bright lights turned garish and cold, reflecting off the empty space where his future had been 10 seconds ago. Arthur walked out into the parking lot, the oatmeal beige reality returning with the force of a physical blow. At 8 o'clock, he stood on Angela's porch. The magnesium flare was gone. He was just a man in a wrinkled suit, standing in the shadows of his own making. "I'm lost at all, Angela," he said, and the honesty in his voice was deeper than any pheromone could reach. "I got high on the feeling of finally being enough, and I gambled away the dinner money. Every cent of it. I wanted to be a king for you, but I'm just a guy who messed up." Angela leaned against the doorframe, studying him. The street lamps cast long, painterly shadows across her face. "You are an idiot, Arthur," she whispered, a small smile finally breaking the tension. "But I don't want the wine. I want the man who finally stopped apologizing for existing. He's the one I've been waiting to meet." They walked. The city didn't feel like a cage that night. It felt like a gallery. They found a small diner tucked under an iron-roofed overhang, and as a sudden, light rain began to tap against the metal. The sound was a rhythmic, grounding percussion that drowned out the rest of the world. They sat on vinyl stools, sharing a plate of fries and talking until the stars came out. They wandered to the park, where the pavement shimmered with glimmer-silt reflections of the moon. Arthur pushed her on the swing, watching her arc into the dark sky, a silhouette of pure freedom. He wasn't the little guy anymore. He was the man holding the ropes. Angela bought the ice cream, 2 vanilla cones from a cart under a flickering neon sign. As they walked home, the sweetness cutting through the grit of the day, Arthur realized he didn't need to return to the basement tonight. The gover came through the opened window, but Arthur was the one who had finally decided to stay outside. He looked at his hands, the hands of a man who had a job to go to tomorrow, a woman who knew his truth, and a voice in his head that finally sounded like his own. Thank you for watching Love Jolt Library. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking and subscribing.